Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and to learn about history. And we're really thankful for all the blessings that you give to us every day. And we are really thankful for Mr. Gentile and to have him as a teacher. And please bless the school, and please bless our homes, and protect our families, and please bless Mr. Gentile so he can teach well as he always does, and we can learn. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. Okie dokie. Well, great. And let's see here. Welcome, Christina. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good, good. So today we're going to talk about command economics, and you'll understand that phrase a lot more if you don't feel comfortable with it already as we go through. So don't worry. You'll notice a lot of similarities as well as some differences in the U.S. and the USSR during Roosevelt's New Deals and then Stalin's 5-year plans. So here we go. So you've read FDR's first inaugural address, 1933. So I want you to reason with me. What is the main idea of his message? What's the main idea, would you say, in your own words?
Well, just so you know, I didn't get my reading done, so I'll be mostly listening today.
Okay, that's okay, and I appreciate the honesty, and it's always there for you if you ever want to go back, but hopefully this class will be enlightening too and helpful to you even though you haven't read. Let's see. Guillermo, did you remember that first inaugural address from President Roosevelt? Do you remember anything that he said? What would you say the main idea was?
I'm trying to remember.
I know that I did read a little bit while I was printing off, and this is the famous address, I guess, where it says, and maybe he said it more than once, but where he says the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. And so what was he talking about? Well, what shouldn't we fear? What would you say?
The Depression.
What was going on at the time that may have been fearful?
Can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Wendy. How are you?
Hi. I just answered the Depression. I don't know if you heard me though.
I didn't hear your answer. Sorry. That's right. So the Great Depression, right? 1933. We're a few years into it, and so what's the main idea then of this speech? What is he saying?
Desperate times call for desperate measures. It's the same lie that government's been promulgating since the beginning of time, and beginning with Satan in the war in heaven.
Yeah, thanks so much for that comment, Wendy. Definitely, right? He's saying that, hey, things are desperate, so desperate in fact that I'm going to change things up. I'm going to change the role of government in the United States, in fact. And then we'll talk about what that means, right? This is a huge deal for the United States. What does he mean when he says that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself? What do you think? I mean, we know that fear, right, could be the depression. We fear the depression, but what is he saying? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. What does he mean by that?
Oh, it reminds me of billboards I even see right now today on I-80 that talk about the economic crisis that America's in right now and saying, don't panic. You know, the important thing is not panic. It's all just self-created, and if we just stop panicking, everything would be fine. And I don't know. I have my own take on this statement. I feel like the only thing we have to fear is government trying to make us afraid, because that's when people give up their liberties. Every time the government makes them afraid of something, people are always only too happy to give up their liberties to find a solution. Right. Yeah. And you know, as soon as you started saying that, Wendy, I just started thinking of when we were talking about Napoleon, right? How, I mean, after just the decade of turmoil, French Revolution, how the French in so many ways were just happy to have somebody like Napoleon say, hey, I'm going to take charge, I'm going to take care of your problems, I'm going to give you security, stability, right? And so, yeah, that's a great comment. Now, let's see, who came to us here? Who was that? Did somebody come? Maybe somebody left.
I just came.
Oh, Walter, there you are. Sorry, I was looking around. There you go. How are you, Walter?
Good.
Good. It was always great to have you. Well, if we look then, What effects of the Great Depression does FDR highlight? Because, I think as we study this document, it's very interesting to see which things he points out about the Depression, because then he'll talk about how he wants to address those things. What does he say? Walter, do you remember what effects of the Great Depression he may have spoken about?
I think he said how people had been unemployed and that people had lost their savings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So lots of unemployment, right? People didn't have savings. As we'll talk about, 80% of Americans at that time didn't have any savings when the Depression hit. Anybody remember anything else that he may have mentioned?
The unscrupulous money changers and the lack of employment, the falsity of material wealth as a standard of success, the need to get people working with projects, and the overbalance of population in cities, problems with foreclosures, the need for national planning, anything that had a public character needed to be nationally planned, the banking and credit needed to be supervised. Those were a few more.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Wendy. Definitely. And he mentions as well, how basically just values, right, had shrunken to fantastic levels, taxes had risen, ability to pay had fallen, curtailment of income, means of exchange are frozen in the currents of trade, right, withered leaves of industrial enterprise lie on every side, farmers without markets for their goods, et cetera, et cetera. So he's painting this picture, right? So then, as we think about that, he gives this message. He said here, quote, happiness lies not in the mere possession of money. It lies in the joy of achievement, in the thrill of creative effort. The joy and moral stimulation of work no longer must be forgotten in the mad chase of evanescent profit. These dark days will be worth all they cost if they teach us that our true destiny is not to be ministered unto, but to minister to ourselves and to our fellow men. So what's his message here, and what does he propose to do about it?
Well, I think it's a good message. I just think his proposal about what to do about it is wrong.
Sure. And what was that proposal, Wendy?
It is true that we need to take care of the poor, and that money isn't everything. In fact, it's really nothing. It's just a means to an end. And so all those things he's saying are true, but we know from his many years in office that his proposal about what to do about it was to force people to take care of the poor. It would no longer become something voluntary. It would be done through taxation and redistribution of wealth.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. So certainly we see this massive creation of jobs in a way that we never have before. And you ask, well, where did it come from? Obviously, you can't get blood from a stone, and so somebody paid for it. It was the U.S. government, right? And then in turn us, and we've been paying for it ever since, you could say. And so as we look at how he's going to rally people to this cause, and we'll talk a lot more specifically about it in a couple of slides about really what he did. It's interesting here. Take a look at this passage, and I'm not going to read it out loud. You can read it to yourselves, but ask yourself this question in reason: what rhetorical devices does FDR use here to rally Americans to his ideas?
What do you mean by rhetorical devices? Because I'm thinking themes like unity and discipline and getting behind a good leader. But what do you mean by rhetorical devices?
Sure. So rhetoric is smart writing and speaking. And so as a smart writer and speaker, what devices did he use, or did his speechwriter use, to try to pull on the heartstrings of Americans, to try to rally them emotionally, to this cause that he's going to then announce.
So then I would say he's tugging at those themes of unity and discipline and uniting behind a strong leader to tackle a problem.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting, too, because in uniting behind that strong leader, think of it, they had just been very, very successful, right, you could say, in finishing World War I, right? And so the nation had mobilized, it had mobilized its armaments long before 1918, but then it had mobilized its forces through conscription, through a draft. It had gone in there, the war had ended, and so it was a people that had just recently, a little over a decade before, been in a war. And so as he's trying to rally people to him as a leader, right, we look and we see that he talks about armed strife, right, a duty hitherto evoked only in a time of armed strife. With this pledge taken, he talks about how he's going to lead, what? A great army of our people dedicated to a disciplined attack, right? So he's using martial language, right, this martial language to muster troops, right, to his battle, the battle that he is choosing to fight in the way he's choosing to fight it, right, against the Depression. Anyway, so this was very interesting here. And then as you see what he outlines, right, he sets up the role of the president, of the executive, in a way, right, that was very, very different than the way that that it had been used in the past, in many instances, not all, but in many. And so as we look here, he talks about now, okay, troops, if you're going to follow me, here's what I'm going to do. And so he talks about the Constitution. And what does he say? Walter, would you read this for us? This is a very interesting quote here. And as Walter reads it, think in your mind about the answer to this question. What does he say about possible changes in American government that he may make during his presidency? Go ahead, Walter.
Our Constitution is so simple and practical that it is impossible always to meet extraordinary needs by changes in emphasis and arrangement without loss of essential form. It may be that an unprecedented demand and need for undelayed action may call for temporary departure from that normal balance of public procedure. I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis, broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency.
Okay. So what do we think?
So is he asking here in this last few lines, broad executive power, is he saying that he's going to ask Congress for more power?
For the executive, right? For him as the president, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So he's basically foreshadowing the change, a break in the balance of power. The executive is going to become far stronger than the legislative branch.
Right.
And he even says, oh, the Constitution has always been able to meet our needs and move with the times, and yet he's recognizing the fact that he's about to make a bunch of changes to the Constitution which have hitherto never been made, but he doesn't bother to use the process by which those changes are supposed to have been made. He never bothered to amend the Constitution, which would have required a two-thirds vote of Congress and three-fourths of the states. So in effect, he's talking about amending the Constitution without doing it the proper way.
Right. So he's basically saying, hey, I know that what I'm going to do is going to be a radical departure from American government in the past, and so be prepared, because I'm going to do it. And so, as we see here, it's very interesting. Oh, actually, hold on a second. There we go. Okay, yes. Sorry. Okay. So if we think about his message, right, how do we feel that it might relate to these principles? And just how do you feel about it in general? I'm sure there are strong feelings because, can I just tell you, this speech was like a lightning rod. It just attracted so much electricity to it because of the controversial things that he said, and then eventually what he did, right? So what do we think about this? How do you feel about it? How would you relate it to these principles of American Heritage School? What do we think?
Well, I think he's using the seventh principle, union, political union, at the expense of most of the other principles, individuality and self-government and conscience and local self-government. So he's emphasizing the seventh one at the expense of all the others, pretty much.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For the sake of unity, right? We need to help this nation in a way that's never been done before. And so, rather than having government be, as local as possible, as internal as possible, right? As self-directed, as possible. Now we're talking about this radical departure to big government, right? Almost as external as possible. And I mean, as we'll see in the USSR, it could get worse. But certainly, right? I mean, this is a huge step, right, away from things like self-government, individuality, if you will, right? Local self-government, and so very controversial, as I said. And he took a lot of heat from it, but a lot of people would say he didn't take enough because times were so bad. And there was a large portion of the population that said, yeah, maybe desperate times do call for these desperate measures. And then, of course, there were others who were strongly opposed to him through the whole time, and in fact would get some of his legislation or some of the acts or the things that the agencies that he created deemed unconstitutional and thrown out. But yet he was able to carry forth most of his vision that he started to state here in this first inaugural address. Anybody else want to weigh in? I mean, how do you feel about what he's saying?
Well, not having done the reading and just going off what we're talking about, it sounds to me like he's trying to do away with the balance of powers, which I feel is a pretty crucial part of our government.
Yeah, and it's true, right? As it's been said, FDR will take the role of the executive in the U.S. frame of government, right? And he will expand it to a huge level, as we'll see. And so here, hang on to your hats, right? We're gonna look into this a little deeper then. So before the 1930s, right? For the most part, right? Of course, you see different presidents bringing things up that are more in line with this, and then others that are much further away. But for the most part, right? Before the 1930s, the U.S. did not provide welfare state benefits, right? Medical care, relief from poverty, income for the unemployed, old age insurance. But then during the Great Depression, right? I mean, it was a big deal, for sure, right? A quarter of the nation's workers lost their jobs. Now, as I've mentioned before, I think I mentioned this in a tutorial, in my class here at American Heritage, one of my students said, what? You mean only 25%? I thought it was like 95%. And no, it's true. It was a quarter, but still that's a lot, right? And that led to 40 million people who had no income or security. Now, there was a reason for that. As I said before, 80% of the workers had no savings at all when this happened, so that was a problem. Okay, if we look, we had two presidents, okay, during this period, one at the very beginning, and then Roosevelt after, 32, okay. President Herbert Hoover expected charitable organizations to aid the poor. He believed that it was not government's job to provide direct relief. Now, Roosevelt, on the other hand, promised Americans a new deal of direct government relief. Roosevelt believed in government regulation, but not government ownership in the way that we would see in the Soviet Union. We'll look at that. Roosevelt's New Deal established the American welfare state, right? And so really, as you can see on the bottom of these slides, I have the creation of the U.S. welfare state. Life as we know it in this country in so many ways comes from President Roosevelt. And of course there were others, but more than anybody else in such short a time, certainly President Roosevelt. And so we look at him providing direct government relief to the unemployed, creating government programs which increased the size of American government to counter the cyclical nature of the market and offer a safety net for workers. He also legitimized labor unions in a way they'd never been legitimized before and created a system of regulation and cooperation between industry and labor. So here's the first New Deal. Did you know there were two? Okay, we have the first New Deal and the second New Deal. The first New Deal came during Roosevelt's first 100 days, right? So a little over 3 months. The 9th of March to the 16th of June, 1933. He repealed prohibition, saying that we can make more money if people could buy the alcohol they wanted. He passed the Emergency Banking Act to reopen banks under government supervision. He created the FDIC, right? You've heard of that, I'm sure, okay, to reform the banking system and insure deposits. He passed the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA. So we have all these acronyms, FDIC, AAA, right? Okay, this is all what you could call alphabet soup, right? To prop up farm prices by limiting supply. Now, limiting supply meant paying farmers to slaughter livestock, to plow under fields, etc. So this is a huge deal. He passed the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, FERA, to provide $500 million to states to then aid the poor in their states. He launched the Civil Works Administration, the CWA, to provide government-sponsored jobs for 4 million workers. He created the CCC to create conservation jobs for 500,000 men. And the terraces that you see on the mountains all around us, right? CCC work, almost all of them. So many other projects around here come from the CCC. Created the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, to construct dams and power projects and then develop the economy in a 7-state area called the Tennessee River Valley. He created the National Industrial Recovery Act, the NIRA, to regulate economic competition. And this one was very, very controversial. He created the Public Works Administration, the PWA, to create employment and business through creating roads, buildings, and other projects. Interestingly enough, the NIRA would be thrown out as unconstitutional later. He created the Homeowners Loan Corporation to provide funds to refinance mortgages for those who couldn't pay. He encouraged the building of dams to provide electricity and irrigation for the West. And so we see the West absolutely transformed because of Roosevelt. I mean, any of you have been to the Hoover Dam or the Grand Coulee Dam in Washington on the Columbia, right? Huge projects, right? Encouraged, supported by the Great Depression and FDR's leadership during it. So created the Civil Works Administration, the CWA, to provide federal jobs for the jobless. Passed the Emergency Relief Appropriations Act to create large-scale public works for the jobless. And this is a different act than other large-scale public works that were done. He passed the Social Security Act, right? So, of course, we all see this coming out of our paychecks, right? If we've ever seen a paycheck or received one, and no matter whether we've scooped ice cream or, worked out of school or for a business, to provide old age pensions and then unemployment insurance. Passed the National Labor Relations Act to provide a federal guarantee of right to organize trade unions and collective bargaining. He created the Resettlement Administration. This was a huge failure. The RA, to relocate poor rural families and then direct reforestation and soil erosion projects. He passed the National Housing Act to provide federal funding for public housing and slum clearance. Passed the Fair Labor Standards Act to set a federal minimum wage and a maximum hours. Created the Securities and Exchange Commission, right? SEC, anybody? Right? We have this with us today to oversee the stock market. Created the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, to ensure bank loans for building and repairing homes. Then, perhaps the most lasting legacy that we hear about today, and we see a lot of this legacy all around us. The WPA, the Works Progress Administration, employed 8 million people in completing roads, bridges, and other work projects, right? Such as these that were created in Federal One, we'll talk about in just a second. The NYA, National Youth Administration, to train unemployed youth and provide part-time jobs for students. Okay, so Federal One, this was one of the most popular parts of the New Deal, the second New Deal here, okay, provided financial assistance to and projects for writers, artists, musicians, and actors. The FWP, the Federal Writers Project, produced, among many other things, a series of popular state and city guidebooks called Life in America. Go to your library. My guess is that, depending on how good the library is, they might have it. I know I would read these at BYU. I thought they were so interesting. Anyway, but Life in America created the FTP, the Federal Theater Project, the Federal Music Project, and the Federal Arts Project to promote the spread of American high culture across the towns and cities of the nation. So as times were tough, FDR wanted the people to be exposed to good culture because he felt that it would lift their spirits and help them then be more productive and have hope and fight fear and that sort of thing. So as we look at all of this, right, because, of course, just so much happens, it's hard to take it all in, Roosevelt's command economics, because that's what you call what he was doing, right? Command economics as opposed to market economics, right? His command economics did not bring about economic recovery. They did not. Tried as he did, okay? But though the New Deals actually did little to alter fundamental property relations or the distribution of wealth in the long term, they really didn't, even though he tried, right? They did radically increase the role and size of the federal government. And they opened the floodgates for even bigger growth in the future. Western and Southern communities were absolutely transformed. Relief programs and Social Security established the framework for a welfare state in which the government was expected to provide a safety net of economic security for each citizen. So these are radical departures. Welcome, Caden. How are you?
Good. I had a lot of troubles trying to get on, but I'm here. I made it.
I'm sorry. I'm glad you're here now, though.
Thanks.
Okay, so the federal government regulated the relationship between industry and labor as never before, so this is another legacy, right? Gave organized workers and farmers the power to challenge corporations. By the end of the 1930s, state and local, and this is what Wendy and Heidi have been talking about, state and local governments clearly took a backseat to the federal government, and the presidency became the unchallenged driver in Washington. The Democrats became the majority party for 40 years, and then all of the above, it's interesting to note, were part of a global trend toward, one, greater government intervention in the economy, so command economics, and two, the economic protection of citizens by the government. The safety net, right? So command economics and the safety net, this global trend. Okay, so if we look at this here, right, to try to understand what he was doing, this is called Keynesian economics. And as we look here, I want you to just take a look at this diagram and tell me, what does it mean? What was Roosevelt trying to do? Because, I mean, if you think about it, right, he didn't just say, okay, I'm going to turn this into a communist state, right? This really was a different thing, because we'll look at a communist state. We'll look at some place where people don't have, well, anyway, I'll go on. We'll get into that. But what was he doing here? Because it's related to John Maynard Keynes, this British economist, macroeconomist, who perhaps was more influential on economic thought in the 20th century than anybody else. Anyway, so what does this tell you here? What was Roosevelt doing, and what is Keynesian economics?
I'm guessing from the picture that it's saying when things are bad and the market's down, the government needs to get involved, and then once things are fixed, government can lessen its involvement. But in reality, the second part never happens.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great point. And certainly, you're also right on the first part, which is that he was basically saying, yeah, and this is the mixed economy that we have today, right? A mixed economy, right? It's not pure market, it's not pure command, it's somewhere in the middle. And it's in the middle, largely based on the philosophies of John Maynard Keynes, right? Which is, just as Wendy was saying, right? When the market is down, because basically Keynes, he studied depressions, and he came to the conclusion, which was a very radical conclusion, he said, it is possible that depressions might never, ever fix themselves. He said that's possible. He said the theory that the market will always be cyclical is wrong. He said that there could be a time where things are bad enough, where you cut enough legs off the chair that the chair topples and can never be placed upright again. And so because of that, he's saying that rather than promoting just the free market, and then also rather than promoting pure command, he's saying we should create a system in which when the free market goes into a nosedive, the government then tries to bolster it and tries to create as much of a flat line to the ups and downs of the market as possible, to just try to flatten them out through intervention, right? And so when the market's up, though, of course, that means that government is supposed to lessen intervention, right? But then when times are bad, then it ups intervention. When times are good, it lessens, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's this seesaw back and forth between command and market, command and market, command and market. even though it's never purely command or never purely market. And so if we think about this then, what was Roosevelt trying to do with the New Deals, and how do the New Deals relate to this Keynesian theory of economics?
Well, he was trying to bolster the economy by creating more jobs.
Right, right. He's basically saying the market has failed us. We can't just wait for it to get better, so the government needs to step in and try to change things, right? And so he comes up with all of these programs, right? The whole litany of alphabet soup. And so, right, he's trying in a huge way, right? Government intervention is just sky high because he felt, remember he said desperate times call for desperate measures, he felt things were bad enough. Now, as we see, did it work? No. And that's the interesting thing. Well, if we look then, okay, if Keynesian economics is a mixture of a market economy and a command economy, what would a pure market economy and a pure command economy look like? And what would a T-chart comparing the two look like? I'm just curious. If you were to throw out pure market, what's pure market? What's pure command? What would they be?
I think for one thing there would be no income tax, and in a pure market economy, and there would only be whatever your source of income was, whether it was tariffs or whatever, that would only be used to prevent crime or to fund an army, things that go along with protecting life, liberty, and property, and nothing else.
Great. What else would we say? What about pure command? Or more, either one. What do they look like in their pure forms? Because we've just talked about a mixed form.
Well, I guess in general you would just say for a market economy it would be, probably virtually no government intervention versus total government intervention for the command economy.
Yeah. Great. Anything else? Well, if we take a look here, right, of course you could add a lot more, but just to keep it really simple, okay, just to go sort of point for point, pure market, you have choice. Pure command, you have force. You have internal versus external. You have the invisible hand of the market doing whatever it does versus the state trying to regulate it. On one hand, you have no government. Really, to have a pure market, you really need no government at all if it's just purely a market. You don't have to have a government, right? Pure command, you could have limitless government. Okay, pure market, there would only be private ownership. And once again, this is pure. This is absolutely pure, right? Pure command, no private ownership. Only private distribution of wealth. However it shakes down, that's the way it shakes down, versus no private distribution of wealth. You're not allowed to sell your own things because the government owns everything. You don't have anything to sell, right? You have only private production versus no private production. The government takes over every aspect, every aspect. There's theoretical equality of opportunity. Well, we all have an opportunity. If you work hard, hopefully somebody will buy your stuff, and if they don't, well, you have the same opportunity as somebody else who might do the same thing, and people don't buy his or hers, right? Okay, versus theoretical equality of condition, right? We're going to try to make everybody equal, have everything equal, right, from the government down, no choice involved. Okay? Pure market economy, people might call it unpredictable, even though, of course, there are lots of things you can predict about it, right? But unpredictable meaning, it has these swings, these cycles, versus predictable, right? At least that's the hope, once again. Okay, and so as we look at this here, it's very, very interesting to see the two different plans and how, once again, they line up so well with, in many ways, right, the two plans presented, right, before the war in heaven, right, in that Grand Council. One based on agency or choice, the other based on coercion or force. Well, if we take a look then at somebody who tried to create a pure command economy, as pure as possible, it didn't work, but tried and did a lot to go towards that way, right, we have command economics in the USSR, right, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So following Lenin's death in 1924, Joseph Stalin, and it's interesting, he had a different last name, but he chose this last name for himself, and that Man of Steel. He ousted powerful revolutionary leader Leon Trotsky and then lesser rival to claim dictatorial status in the USSR's Communist Party. He then decided to transform the Soviet Union into an industrial communist powerhouse. So from your reading of Stalin's The Results of the First Five-Year Plan, what were the similarities and differences between command economics in the U.S. and the USSR? Similarities and differences.
Well, I don't think there was pressure to eliminate small farms and create collectivism. Not nearly as much. That we've evolved to that at this point, but initially there wasn't that kind of a push, and we didn't need to create industry out of nothing, out of thin air, because we already had it at this point.
Excellent, Wendy. Two great points. Who else would like to enlighten us? So what about private property? Similarities and
We
differences?
still had it.
Yeah, well, my thought on that was, we still had private property, where in Russia you have no private property.
Right, and that's a huge difference, right? A huge difference, definitely. Well, is anybody else who'd like to add to that? Because we'll look at some of these in more depth on. Okay, well, it's interesting because as Wendy said, certainly, right, industrialization almost out of thin air. Stalin promised to quintuple the output of electricity and double the output of heavy industry, things like iron, steel, coal, and machinery, in 5 years. And in fact, he did more than what he promised in 4 years. So this was just unbelievable for changing the economy and society of Russia, or the USSR. So to fulfill his promise, he put into effect a series of 5-year plans, as he called them, systems of centralized command economics inspired by the German economy of World War I, where they were able to mobilize so quickly, right, in terms of their military stores. The first plan began in 1928, and so if we take a look, right, October 28, the Communist Party, right, under Stalin's direction, built whole industries and entire cities from nothing. Recruited and trained millions of peasants to work in them. Rapid industrialization wreaked havoc on the land as hydroelectric dams turned rivers into reservoirs. Roads, canals, and railroad tracks cleared the land, and forests became farmland. So, I mean, this was absolute revolution. I mean, this was so radical. So hold on to your seatbelts, right? Or hold on to your hats and buckle your seatbelts. Okay. How did Stalin pay for his massive investments, provide labor for his new industries, and feed millions of new workers? Okay? The collectivization of agriculture. He squeezed the peasantry through this radical social experiment, and this is what it was. He turned small private farms into huge collectives and made farmers work together in shared fields. So taking away private property. Okay? Each collective was expected to give the government a fixed amount of food and then distribute surplus to its members. He demanded that collectives employ modern methods of mechanized, mass-produced agriculture and provided machinery on loan. So, the tractors and all the other new implements to make this a reality. Along with funding the 5-year plan, collectivization was expected to do two things: thrust the peasants into industrial life. So basically, this was fast forward, right? But in real life, this was taking the remote and clicking the double F in society in the USSR. He wanted to just thrust them into industrialization, and then he also wanted to place the historically unruly peasants under close government control. We see a massive propaganda campaign for collectivization that sweeps the Soviet countryside. At first, most peasants bought into the new program, but then kulaks, and this is different than gulags, so these are kulaks, which means the fists, because of the protest they put up, right? Okay, they were the better off peasants. They were peasants nonetheless, but they were better off than others. They protested giving up their rights to private property and its full fruits. They're saying, wait a minute, if we're going to put in all the labor, why are we going to give it to you? Okay, kulaks, they burnt their fields, they destroyed their tools, they killed their domesticated animals, all to protest what Stalin was doing. Within a few months, and these numbers are just mind-boggling, half of the USSR's horses and cattle and 2/3 of its sheep and goats lay dead because of the kulaks protesting against this 5-year plan. well, we see this massive retaliation that is just devastating to the kulaks. Stalin orders the liquidation of the kulaks as a class, and he forced poor peasants to attack their neighbors. 8 million kulaks were arrested. Many of them were executed, and the rest were banished to slave labor camps, where most met death by starvation. Peasants who remained were the least competent at agriculture. That's why they were not the better off peasants for the most part. Okay, and so their efforts returned low yields. So the very people who could actually help him were the ones that he ended up killing. Without enough draft animals, they could not grow enough food to support the rapidly growing cities. And so we see that the Communist Party ended up taking the lion's share, the great majority of the poor harvest for industrial workers, which left little or nothing for the collectivized farmers. And so we see 5 million people die when a famine then decimates the Soviet countryside, killing off these lesser peasants, killing 1 in every 20 farmers in 33 and 34. So in 33, right, remember you read this address talking about reviewing the 5-year plan, the results, and so then he started another one because he was so pleased with what happened. And so when he commenced the second one, though, it had a little bit of a different emphasis. It was to build up the USSR's armament industry, so all of the things that they could use to fight after the Nazi Party took over Germany. Because just as the Nazi Party was worried about the Russians, or the Soviets, right, the Soviets were worried about the Nazis. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow. So between 1927 and 37, Soviet metals and machines increased, and look at this number, 14-fold, 14-fold. While consumer goods, on the other hand, and this shows you where Stalin's emphasis was, right, became scarce, and foodstuffs needed to be rationed due to the economy's hyper-emphasis on heavy industry. By 1937, after 2 5-year plans, the Soviet people were worse off than they had been during the Lenin years. Now, this isn't the country's economy in general. This is the quality of life or standard of living for the peasants. So to prevent resistance to the radical policies, Stalin created a climate of suspicion and fear. And this is something that we'll see is common to Mussolini, as well as Hitler, as well as Stalin. And as Wendy said, it is interesting, too, that FDR as well talked about fear. Stalin arrested numerous workers on specious charges, trumped-up charges of counter-revolution. You know, if you sneeze the wrong way, figuratively speaking, you could be thrown in jail. Suspicious of opposition. I mean, just in total paranoia, Stalin purged the Communist Party of 1 million members. That's 1/3 of its membership. He had 8 top military officials and many of their subordinates executed for what he called anti-party, meaning Communist Party, activities. He had the head of his anti-opposition police force, the NKVD, killed. He is also possibly responsible for many other deaths, but these are the ones that are confirmed. And then sentenced millions of people without any trial at all for supposed disloyalty to the Communist Party. He sent 8 million of these people to gulags, which are slave labor camps for political prisoners, where upwards of 1 million people died each year. Now, on the flip side, if you didn't rub Stalin the wrong way, if you were lucky enough, opportunities for Soviet workers who managed to stay in favor did increase. And it's interesting to see which opportunities increased. Women, especially, found new doors open to them, such as jobs as steel workers, physicians, and office managers. So we see women leaving the home now under Stalin's plan. Even though when they came back to the home, they were still expected to be the primary caregivers. And the men were not expected to compensate in this new plan that he was hatching. Okay, so those who rose into the Communist Party's upper ranks received more privileges than ever before. And so if you had been a very poor peasant, but somehow through being loyal enough and working your way up, you might receive more than ever before. But that was by far the exception and not the rule. Well, it's interesting because talk about what force can do. Okay, Stalin's brutality made the USSR industrialize faster than any nation in history. By the late 1930s, the Soviet Union was the world's 3rd largest industrial power, behind the U.S. and then a resurgent Germany. The USSR became the envy of many intellectuals and common folk around the world as its rigid command economy was the only major economy to thrive during the devastating global depression, the Great Depression, that suffocated market economies during the 1930s. And this was because they pulled themselves out of the market economy. They were isolated. It was a command economy. They didn't depend on a market. Right? And so we start to see people, when times are tough, saying, oh boy, maybe this isn't so bad, but yet they didn't know about so much of what was going on behind the scenes. So what do we think about this?
Well, you compared it earlier to Satan's plan of force, and I think in both you kind of see this outward, it looks like a good idea, just on the surface. Oh, look, things seem to be well, their economy seems so good compared to everyone else's. Things, you know, they're the third largest industrial power so soon, this must be successful, just like we might have looked at Satan's plan and thought, wow, look at how many people are making it back, and everybody seems to be happily, you know, gaining eternal life. But you get deeper under the surface and you realize it's just a big chaotic mess of just brutality and fear and nothing, no real development for the individual.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you so much, Christina. What else do we think about this?
Well, it produces some quick, good short-term results and some really horrible long-term results. And I think even as I compare it to America, you know, starting with Woodrow Wilson and moving forward through FDR and others, we've benefited in the short term from some of those policies leading up to the unprecedented prosperity that we had up through, you know, into the early 2000s. And I think from here on out, it's just a decline because inevitably, you know, our rise and fall will take longer than Russia's did. But I think we're experiencing the same effect. You know, we've passed the point of no return, and the short-term benefits have now succumbed to the long-term problems.
Yeah, that's a great way to think of it, Wendy. Thank you so much for that. Anybody else want to weigh in? Command economics in the U.S., the USSR, similarities, differences. Any thoughts? Anything surprise you?
I think the deaths should surprise us. I think you mentioned last week you compared, you know, the number of deaths under Hitler to the number of deaths under Stalin, and I wish that was a fact that was more widely known.
Yeah, it's true, and that's a really good point because until recently, and once again, as I said before in the class where I mentioned this, to take nothing away from the atrocities committed by the Nazis, you know, the saying is true, Hitler killed his millions and Stalin his tens of millions. And it's too often forgotten what Joseph Stalin was responsible for, and just so tragic. So thank you for that. Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So this depression, is this the depression during this global depression?
Right, the Great Depression, right. And because market economies are so interconnected a lot of the time, it became a global Great Depression rather than just a Great Depression in the United States.
What I thought was interesting, in the slide previous, it said that a lot of other countries kind of envied Stalin's economy because here it says it was the only major economy to thrive during the devastating global depression. During Andrew Jackson's presidency, according to this documentary that I've been watching, it says that the bankers threatened to cause a depression. And they did. And so I look at this now, and it's interesting that the economy to thrive was kind of, you know, a forced economy, kind of a socialistic, communistic economy. So it makes me wonder, was that controlled to an extent, or was that planned? Because if the same bankers that caused the economy in the 1800s caused this one, and what they ultimately want is a one world order, I wonder if, it just makes me wonder. I wonder
Yeah.
if the reason theirs thrived is, to kind of show the rest of the world, this is what we need. This will prevent depressions from happening in the future. And the common folk, I wonder if that behavior, that thought, that the envious feeling was created. I wonder if that was all just kind of part of the plan. I don't know, just interesting to think about.
Yeah, no, I mean, very, very, very interesting comment, Caden, and I appreciate it. Certainly a lot to think about. Well, I want to just close by this great quote here, because of course, today we've looked at the creation of the welfare state in the United States, and then we've looked at this extreme command economy, right? Communism, right? This extreme form of socialism and socialization in the USSR under Stalin. And so I found this great quote by President Marion G. Romney from In Mine Own Way, Conference 1976. And so who would like to read this for us? It gives a lot to think about in the end. So let's have somebody read it, and then I have a French class coming in to take a test in just a few minutes. So let's read it, and then maybe some final thoughts, and then we'll pick up with fascism tomorrow with Hitler and Mussolini. So who'd like to read this for us?
I'll read it.
I can read it.
Oh, she can read it.
How about this? Caden, you read the first half, Christina the second half?
Okay.
There's enough to go around.
I'll end around where it starts at the practice, okay? Which is about the middle of the page.
That would be perfect.
As our modern societies follow the course which led to the fall of Rome and other civilizations which succumbed to the deceptive lure of the welfare state and socialism, I think it not inappropriate for me to emphasize again the Lord's plan for the temporal salvation of His mortal children. It is the responsibility of every Latter-day Saint to work and so impart of his substance regardless of the shifting standards of this world. We must uphold these principles and oppose every degradation of them. We must be careful not to adopt the commonly accepted practice of accepting the government or anyone other than ourselves to supply us with the necessities of life.
The practice of coveting and receiving unearned benefits has now become so fixed in our society that even men of great wealth and possessing the means to produce more wealth are expecting the government to guarantee them a profit. Elections often turn on what the candidates promise to do for voters from government funds. This practice, if universally accepted and implemented in any society, will make slaves of its citizens. We cannot afford to become wards of the government, even though we have a legal right to do so. It requires too great a sacrifice in self-respect and in political, temporal, and spiritual independence. Let us work for what we need. Let us be self-reliant and independent. Salvation can be obtained on no other principle. Salvation is an individual matter, and we must work out our own salvation in temporal as well as in spiritual things.
So closing thoughts then as we relate this great talk. And honestly, I encourage you to read it. If you want to read the whole thing, unbelievable talk, wonderful. About this subject. But what closing thoughts do we have then as we wrap up command economics in the U.S. and USSR?
Well, I love what Caden and Christina just read. I thought that was great. More people need to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Heidi, for that. Walter, what do you think?
I don't know, just yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Walter. Guillermo, do you want to give an opinion?
I just like the part where it says it is the responsibility of every Latter-day Saint to work and so impart of his substance, and regardless of the shifting standards of this world. I just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Guillermo. Well, certainly, like I said, a lot to think about, and I just pray that we will stay true to these gospel principles of temporal welfare as we consider these subjects that we're going to be talking about for really the rest of the year in one form or another, as we see these different types of macroeconomic systems and then governments rolling forth really from early middle of the 20th century onward. And thank you so much for your great reasoning and relating today, everybody. And I look forward to our conversation tomorrow then about Hitler and Mussolini, talking about different forms of fascism in Italy, Italian fascism, and then in Germany with German Nazism. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gentile.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.